Section 45 of the Endeavour Journal of Sir Joseph Banks, Journal from 25 August 1768 to 12 July 1771, by Joseph Banks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Section 45. Some account of that part of New Holland called New South Wales. Part 3. Naked as these people are when abroad, they are scarce at all better defended from the injuries of the weather when at home, if that name can with propriety be given to their houses, as I believe they never make any stay in them, but wandering like the Arabs from place to place, set them up whenever they meet with one, where sufficient supplies of food are to be met with, and as soon as these are exhausted, remove to another, leaving the houses behind, which are framed with less art, or rather less industry, than any habitations of human beings, probably that the world can show. At Stingray's Bay, where they were the best, each was capable of containing within it 4 or 5 people, but not one of all these could in any direction extend himself his whole length. For height he might just set upright, but if inclined to sleep must coil himself in some crooked position, as the dimensions were in no direction long enough to hold him otherwise. They were built in the form of an oven of pliable rods, about as thick as a man's finger, the ends of which were stuck into the ground, and the whole covered with palm leaves and broad pieces of bark. The door was a pretty large hole at one end, opposite to which by the ashes there seemed to be a fire kept pretty constantly to the northward. Again, where the warmth of the climate made the houses less necessary, they were in proportion still more slight. A house there was nothing but a hollow shelter, about 3 or 4 feet deep, built like the former, and like them covered with bark. One side of this was entirely open, which was always that which was sheltered from the course of the prevailing wind, and opposite to this door was always a heap of ashes, the remains of a fire probably more necessary to defend them from mosquitoes than cold. In these it is probable that they only sought to defend their heads and the upper part of their bodies from the draught of air, trusting their feet to the care of the fire. And so small they were that even in this manner not above 3 or 4 people could possibly crowd into one of them. But small as the trouble of erecting such houses must be, they did not always do it. We saw many places in the woods where they had slept with no other shelter than a few bushes and grass a foot or 2 high to shade them from the wind. This probably is their custom while they travel from place to place and sleep upon the road, in situations where they do not mean to make any stay. The only furniture belonging to these houses, that we saw at least, was oblong vessels of bark, made by the simple contrivance of tying up the 2 ends of a longish piece with a withe, which not being cut off serves for a handle. These we imagined serve for the purpose of water buckets, to fetch water from the springs, which may sometimes be distant. We have reason to suppose that when they travel, these are carried by the women from place to place. Indeed, the few opportunities we had of seeing the women, they were generally employed in some laborious occupation, as fetching wood, gathering shellfish, etc. The men again maybe constantly carry their arms in their hands, 3 or 4 lances in one, and the machine with which they throw them in the other. These serve them in the double capacity of defending them from their enemies, and striking any animal or fish that they may meet with. Besides these, each has a small bag, about the size of a moderate cabbage net, which hangs loose upon the back, fastened to a small string which passes over the crown of his head. This seems to contain all their worldly treasures. Each man hardly more than might be contained in the crown of a hat, a lump or 2 of paint, some fish hooks and lines, shells to make them, points of darts and resin, and their usual ornaments were the general contents. Thus live these, I had almost said, happy people, content with little, nay, almost nothing, far enough removed from the anxieties attending upon riches, or even the possession of what we Europeans call common necessaries. Anxieties intended maybe by Providence to counterbalance the pleasure arising from the possession of wished-for attainments, consequently increasing with increasing wealth, and in some measure keeping up the balance of happiness between the rich and the poor. From them appear how small are the real wants of human nature, which we Europeans have increased to an excess which would certainly appear incredible to these people could they be told it. Nor shall we cease to increase them as long as luxuries can be invented and riches found for the purchase of them, and how soon these luxuries degenerate into necessaries may be sufficiently evinced by the universal use of strong liquors, tobacco, spices, tea, etc., etc. In this instance, again, Providence seems to act the part of a leveller, doing much toward putting all ranks into an equal state of wants, and consequently of real poverty. The great and magnificent want as much, and maybe more, than the middling. They again in proportion more than the inferior. Each rank still looking higher than his station, but confining itself to a certain point, above which it knows not how to wish, not knowing at least perfectly what is there enjoyed. Tools among them we saw almost none. Indeed, having no arts which require any, it is not to be expected that they should have many. A stone made sharp at the edge, and a wooden mallet, were the only ones we saw that had been formed by art. The use of these we supposed to be in making the notches in the bark of high trees, by which they climb them for purposes unknown to us, and for cutting and perhaps driving wedges to take off the bark, which they must have in large pieces for making canoes, shields, and water buckets, and also for covering their houses. Besides these, they use shells and corals to scrape the points of their darts, and polish them with the leaves of a kind of wild fig, Ficus regulo, which bites upon wood almost as keenly as our European shave-grass used by the joiners. Their fish hooks are made of shell, very neatly and some exceedingly small. Their lines are also well twisted, and they have them from the size of a half-inch rope to almost the fineness of a hair made of some vegetable. Of netting, they seem to be quite ignorant, but make their bags, the only thing of the kind we saw among them, by laying the threads loop within loop, something in the way of knitting, only very coarse and open, in the very same manner as I have seen ladies make purses in England. That they had no sharp instruments among them, we venture to guess from the circumstance of an old man who came to us one day with a beard rather larger than his fellows. The next day he came again. His beard was then almost cropped close to his chin, and upon examination we found the ends of the hairs all burnt, so that he had certainly singed it off. Their manner of hunting and taking wild animals we had no opportunity of seeing. We only guessed that the notches which they had everywhere cut in the bark of large trees, which certainly served to make climbing more easy to them, might be intended for the ascending these trees, in order either to watch for any animal who unwarily passed under them, they might pierce with their darts, or for the taking of birds who at night might roost in them. We guessed also that the fires, which we saw so frequently as we passed along shore, extending over a large tract of country, and by which we could constantly trace the passage of the Indians, who went from us in Endeavour's river up into the country, were intended in some way or other for the taking of the animal called by them kangaroo, which we found to be so much afraid of fire that we could hardly force it with our dogs to go over places newly burnt. They get fire very expeditiously, with 2 pieces of stick, very readily and nimbly. The one must be round and 8 or 9 inches long, and both it and the other should be dry and soft. The round one they sharpen a little at one end, and pressing it upon the other, turn it round with the palms of their hands, just as Europeans do a chocolate mill, often shifting their hands up and running them down quick to make the pressure as hard as possible. In this manner they will get fire in less than 2 minutes, and when once possessed of the smallest spark, increase it in a manner truly wonderful. We often admired to see a man run along shore who seemed to carry no one thing in his hand, and yet, as he ran along, just stooping down every 50 or 100 yards, smoke and fire were seen among the driftwood and dirt at that place almost the instant he had left it. This we afterwards found was done chiefly by the infinite readiness with which every kind of rubbish, sticks, withered leaves or grass, already almost dried to tinder by the heat of the sun and the dryness of the season, would take fire. He took, for instance, when he set off, a small bit of fire, and wrapping it up in dry grass, ran on. This soon blazed. Then he laid it down on the most convenient place for his purpose that he could find, and taking up a small part of it, wrapped that in part of the dry rubbish in which he had laid it, in this manner proceeding as long as he thought proper. Their weapons, offensive at least, were precisely the same wherever we saw them, except that at the very last view we had of the country, we saw through our glasses a man who carried a bow and arrows. In this we might, but I believe we were not, mistaken. They consisted of only one species, a pike or lance, from 8 to 14 feet in length. This they threw short distances with their hands, and for longer, 40 or more yards, with an instrument made for the purpose. The upper part of these lances were made either of cane or the stalk of a plant, something resembling a bulrush, which was very straight and light. The point again was made of very heavy and hard wood, the whole artfully balanced for throwing, though very clumsily made in 2, 3, or 4 joints, at each of which the parts were let into each other, and besides being tied round, the joint was smeared over very thick with their resin, which made it larger and more clumsy than any other part. The points were of several sorts. Those which we concluded to be intended against men were indeed most cruel weapons. They were all single-pointed, either with the stings of stingrays, a large one of which served for the point, and 3 or 4 smaller tied the contrary way made barbs, or simply of wood made very sharp, and smeared thick over with resin, into which was stuck many broken bits of sharp shells, so that if such a weapon pierced a man, it was many to one that it could not be drawn out without leaving several of those unwelcome guests in his flesh, certain to make the wound 10 times more difficult to cure than it otherwise would be. The others, which we supposed to be used merely for striking birds, fish, etc., had generally simple points of wood, or if they were barbed, it was only with one splinter of wood. The instrument with which they threw them was a plain piece of stick, or piece of wood, 2½ or 3 feet in length, at one end of which was a small knob or hook, and near the other a kind of cross-piece to hinder it from slipping out of their hands. With this contrivance, simple as it is and ill-fitted for the purpose, they threw the lances 40 or more yards, with a swiftness and steadiness truly surprising. The knob being hooked into a small dent, made in the top of the lance, they held it over their shoulder, and shaking it an instant as balancing, threw it with the greatest ease imaginable. The neatest of these throwing sticks that we saw was made of a hard reddish wood, polished and shining. Their sides were flat and about 2 inches in breadth, and the handle, or part to keep it from dropping out of the hand, covered with thin layers of polished bone, very white. These I believe to be the things which many of our people were deceived by imagining them to be wooden swords, clubs, etc., according to the direction in which they happened to see them. Defensive weapons we saw only in Stingray's Bay, and there only a single instance. A man who attempted to oppose our landing came down to the beach with a shield of an oblong shape, about 3 feet long and 1 1/2 broad, made of the bark of a tree. This he left behind when he ran away, and we found, upon taking it up, that it plainly had been pierced through with a single pointed lance near the centre. That such shields were frequently used in that neighbourhood we had, however, sufficient proof, often seeing upon trees the places from whence they had been cut, and sometimes the shields themselves cut out, but not yet taken off from the tree, the edges of the bark only being a little raised with wedges, which shows that these people certainly know how much thicker and stronger bark becomes by being suffered to remain upon the tree some time after it is cut round. That they are a very pusillanimous people we had reason to suppose from every part of their conduct in every place where we were, except Stingray's Bay, and they are only the instance of the 2 people who opposed the landing of our 2 boats full of men for near a quarter of an hour, and were not to be drove away till several times wounded with small shot, which we were obliged to do, as at that time we suspected their lances to be poisoned from the quantity of gum which was about their points. But upon every other occasion, both there and everywhere else, they behaved alike, shunning us and giving up any part of the country which we landed upon at once. And that they used stratagems in war we learned by the instance in Stingray's Bay, where our surgeon with another man walking in the woods met 8 Indians. They stood still, but directed another man who was up in a tree how and when he should throw a lance at them, which he did, and on its not taking effect, they all ran away as fast as possible. Their canoes were the only things in which we saw a manifest difference between the southern and northern people. Those in the southward were little better contrived or executed than their houses. A piece of bark, tied together in plaits at the ends, and kept extended in the middle by small bows of wood, was the whole embarkation, which carried 1 or 2, nay, we once saw 3 people, who moved it along in shallow water by setting with long poles, and in deeper by paddling with paddles about 18 inches long, one of which they held in each hand. In the middle of these canoes was generally a small fire upon a heap of seaweed. For what purpose intended we did not learn, except perhaps to give the fishermen an opportunity of eating fish in perfection by broiling it the moment it is taken. To the northward, again, their canoes, though exceedingly bad, were far superior to these. They were small, but regularly hollowed out of the trunk of a tree and fitted with an outrigger to prevent them from oversetting. In these they had paddles large enough to require both hands to work them. Of this sort we had an opportunity of examining only one of them, which might be about 10 or 11 feet long, but was immensely narrow. The sides of the tree were left in their natural state, untouched by tools, but each end they had cut off from the under part and left part of the upper side overhanging. The inside was also not ill hollowed, and the sides tolerably thin. What burthen it was capable of carrying we had many times an opportunity to see. 3 people, or at most 4, or as many as dare venture in it, and if any more wanted to come over the river, which in that place was about a half a mile broad, one of these would carry back the canoe and fetch them. This was the only piece of workmanship which I saw among the New Hollanders that seemed to require tools. How they had hollowed her out or cut the ends, I cannot guess, but upon the whole the work was not ill done. Indian patients might do a great deal with shells, etc., without the use of stone axes, which if they had had, they would probably have used to form her outside as well as inside. That such a canoe takes them up much time and trouble in the making may be concluded from our seeing so few, and still more from the moral certainty that we have that the tribe which visited us, and consisted to our knowledge of 21 people, and maybe of several more, had only one such belonging to them. How tedious must it be for these people to be ferried over the river a mile or 2 wide by 3s and 4s at a time. How well therefore worth the pains for them to stock themselves better with boats, if they could do it. I am inclined to believe that besides these canoes, the northern people know and make use of the bark one of the south, and that, from having seen one of the small paddles left by them upon a small island where they had been fishing for turtle, it lay upon a heap of turtle shells and bones, trophies of the good living they had had when there, and with it lay a broken staff of a turtle peg and a rotten line, tools which had been worn out, I suppose, in the service of catching them. We had great reason to believe that at some season of the year the weather is much more moderate than we found it, otherwise the Indians never could have ventured in any canoes that we saw half so far from the mainland as islands were, on which we saw evident marks of their having been, such as decayed houses, fires, the before-mentioned turtle bones, etc. May be, at this more moderate time, they may make and use such canoes, and when the blustering season comes on, may convert the bark of which they were made to the purposes of covering houses, making water buckets, etc., etc., well knowing that when the next season returns, they will not want a supply of bark to rebuild their vessels. Another reason we have to imagine that such a moderate season exists, and that the winds are then upon the eastern board, as we found them, is that whatever Indian houses or sleeping places we saw on these islands were built upon the summits of small hills, if there were any, or if not, in places where no bushes or wood could intercept the course of the wind, and their shelter was always turned to the eastward. On the main again, their houses were universally built in valleys, or under the shelter of trees, which might defend them from the very winds which in the islands they exposed themselves to. Of their language I can say very little. Our acquaintance with them was of so short a duration that none of us attempted to use a single word of it to them. Consequently, the list of words I have given could be got no other manner than by signs, inquiring of them what in their language signified such a thing, a method obnoxious to many mistakes. For instance, a man holds in his hand a stone and asks the name of it. The Indian may return him for answer either the real name of a stone, one of the properties of it, as hardness, roughness, smoothness, etc., one of its uses, or the name peculiar to some particular species of stone, which name the inquirer immediately sets down as that of a stone. To avoid, however, as much as possible this inconvenience, myself and 2 or 3 more got from them as many words as we could, and having noted down those which we thought, from circumstances, we were not mistaken in, we compared our lists. Those in which all the lists agreed, or rather were contradicted by none, we thought ourselves morally certain not to be mistaken in. Of these my list chiefly consists, some only being added that were in only one list, such as from the ease with which signs might be contrived to ask them were thought little less certain than the others. Wajiji, the head. Moryi, the hair. Melsia, the ears. Yembi, the lips. Banju, the nose. Anjar, the tongue. Walar, the beard. Dambu, the neck. Kayo, the nipples. Tulpur, the navel. Mangal, the hands. Koman, the thighs. Pongo, the knees. Edamal, the feet. Ni oror, the heel. Chumal, the sole. Tongarn, the ankle. Mi anang, fire. Walba, a stone. Yowal, sand. Gurkha, a rope. Bama, a man. Poinja, a male turtle. Mami Ingo, a female. Maragan, a canoe. Palenyo, to paddle. Takai, set down. Mi erbarar, smooth. Garambi, blood. Yoku, wood. Tapul, bone in nose. Charngala, a bag. Koki, the nails. Galan, the sun. Churko, yerka, tut. Expressions may be of admiration, which they continually used while in company with us. They very often used the article G, which seems to answer to our English A, as G Gurkha, a rope. End of section 45. Part 3. Of some account of that part of New Holland called New South Wales.